Good morning, everyone. So we are going to talk about DevOps world. We are in the DevOps CI/CD processes. A lot of things moves around CI/CD. Everybody has their own definition, own terminology of what CI/CD is. Today I'm going to talk about how we integrated CloudBees Flow into our organization and how did it went through our journey about AdvancedMD and how did we integrate CloudBees Flows into it. So talking about AdvancedMD, we are a national healthcare software provider for physician practices. We serve around 30,000 providers across the United States for small practices. And what we deliver is, we call it as a rhythm, which is making sure that the software has everything that it needs for a practice to seamlessly work and make sure they get their revenue faster. They make sure they take care of the patients. So that's the whole our software delivery mechanism is. It's consists of multitude of products, and software delivery is very important for us because of the word rhythm. Every product, every feature needs to talk to each other to make sure there is no interruption in the physician's workflow. How we went into the CI/CD process was few years back. We only had 2 products into our portfolio, but over the last 5 years, we have integrated around 20, 25 products, and now our suite has become bigger. It has become more complex. So CI/CD to us is making sure that the software gets delivered faster, and there is nothing that a physician has to worry about his revenue cycle. He has to worry about his money that he gets paid from the patients, as well as from the patient care that he's taking into it. So our journey, I'm going to talk about our journey. It was not an easy journey of CI/CD process. And to me, the DevOps is a journey. It's not a destination. It has to still continue, evolve every day. Every week we learn something new. Every deployment we learn something new. We tweak our processes. So it's an ongoing journey, and it's going to keep on growing. I think it has no stoppage to it. There are new tools coming in. We learned about SDM today, which actually gives a lot of good insights. So this process will keep on going as we go through it. So to talk about it in 2014, that's where we used to have 2 products actually, EHR, what we call as an electronic health record, and the other one what we call as a practice management. The process that we used to have in those days was a single server configuration, which means whenever we deploy our software, we deploy it on the same server configuration. So there was no distinction between whether it's a microservice, whether it's a web API, or whether it's Angular front end or IIS front end. So that's how it was. Deployments were good, actually, because we didn't have to tweak our processes. It was single form of deploying things around it. As we went into building more products, we figured it out this architecture is not going to solve continuous delivery. And sometimes we also call it as a continuous disruption. So to do that, what we essentially, in 2016, we started talking about microservices. We started talking about web APIs. We started talking about multiple server configurations. And that's when our existing tools were lacking to meet the needs that the department needed. It was lacking to provide good product delivery to our physicians, to our customer bases around it. At that point, we had to do something to make sure software delivery doesn't become the bottleneck to our business. It should not be impactful to our revenue. And that's why we started, and it was one of my predecessors who actually started bringing in those concepts. And then we evaluated multiple tools, and Flow, which at that point was called Commander, and then CloudBees got it last year. Flow was introduced in our ecosystem. It was to provide us a good view of how we can deploy our monolithic software application into the server configurations. Now, CI/CD is good in the terms of technology, but implementing any new tools needs people's, processes, cultures, and in this morning keynote, Rahul talked about the development experience. So bringing any tools into the ecosystem caused a lot of rebellions, revolutions, and every engineer has his own way of interpreting the tools around it. So regardless of that, we actually went ahead and said we'll use Flow, and we'll figure it out as we go through the process. How do we can incorporate Flow into the AdvancedMD's processes, AdvancedMD's culture, and how do we deploy our software? In 2018, and if you look at it, between 2016, we started talking about Flow, DevOps, and all those things, and it took us 2 years to implement some of these processes. It was not about the tools, but it is about how do we make sure our culture gets aligned to make sure the tools that we use can actually augment the skill set that we have and not disrupt it completely. It was more about educating people to talk about how this can actually change some of the behaviors that we have, how we can change our mindset of deploying software. So those all things took time. Around how do we educate the entire organization is how do we implement a CI/CD processes in it. And it is still going on. I mean, as I talked about it, every day there's new tools coming in. In 2016, our definition of CI/CD was deploying a package to a server. And then slowly it is evolving around tools like Sonar Cubes, tools like Fortified. Those tools are getting integrated into our delivery pipeline. So what we started as a journey was deploying a package, which we could have done with PowerShell or any of those things. But we need a more robust tool because our vision was to integrate all those operations, as we talked about, left to right, right of those DevOps. So things are moving along as it. And then finally, we are still in the process of redefining how Flow can be part of our SDLC lifecycle, how it can be part of our agile lifecycle management, how does it get part of our product management group so that they can adopt the delivery mechanism of it. So, and again, we are still, to me, at the end of it, as I said earlier, it's a journey and it's not a destination. We keep evolving, we keep changing every week to figure out our processes better. Now, to talk about some of those things, life before Flow, and it happens today as well, and it happens across the organization infrastructure. The dev actually starts talking about operations being the impactful one. They didn't configure the server correctly. Then sometimes they talk about the release engineering team didn't know how to deploy the software in the right sequencing around it. So there's always this conversation that always happens that it's always somebody else's fault. And this morning, Sean actually talked about his when he actually went to the developer to talk about what's going wrong. He said he went to operations to talk about what he went wrong, and finally he went to the engineering manager to figure out what he went wrong. But this is an ever-growing conversation, and we always used to have it. And we still have it, but not at the scale that we used to have it before Flow. This was one of the most interesting images that I found in Google. If you search about walls of confusion, it talks about dev and ops. So it is so interesting, a generic terminology. Everybody in the industry is now talking about how they want change. Somebody wants stability, but those two groups are not talking about it. So that was how our life was before Flow. We talked about multiple teams. So there was multiple engineering teams. They were not talking to the right set of individuals. They're not talking about operations. I mean, there's a saying that we used to have it takes a village to deploy a release. It's a lot of people is needed to have a successful releases around it. Multiple tool sets. So people uses PowerShell, Python, and each engineering team has their own way of deploying things. So there was too many tool sets. There was no governance. There was no auditability around those processes. Everybody uses their own set of mechanism. The goal was to make sure the software gets deployed. The goal was not about unifying things. The goal was not about who is code reviewing even the scripts, right? So I mean, in our development processes, we talk about multiple code reviewers, multiple QAs, but when we go to the deployment stuff, we don't talk about who is reviewing the scripts, who is making sure the scripts are good to go around it. So everybody had their own way of deploying things around it. And then we always call it the late show. So it's basically you start early, and you never know when it's going to end. And And it's always a challenge, and it still is a challenge, I mean, you never know what went wrong through the entire process. You have to make sure you got rollback functionality implemented around it. So there was a lot of things. If you see, we were working in the chaos mode of what life was before Flow. A lot of people blaming each other, a lot of engineering blaming dev, and it still happens, but not at the scale where we wanted to be. So the first challenge is remember I talked about in 2016 is when we actually decided to go into the CI/CD processes. And then 2017, somebody signed a check to get Flow implemented in AdvancedMD. But the first challenge that we had was we don't know what CI/CD was. We didn't even know what Flow was, what it could do. It was a group of people who decided together, evaluated multiple softwares, and then Flow was the chosen one. But we had no idea how to implement it. How do we scale it across the organization? So that was the first challenge that we had to figure out as a team on how do we implement Flow into the organization. The next thing was, again, is talk about strategy and implementation. As we were evolving around number of products, the innovation features that were going on, we had to implement some kind of strategy. But again, since we didn't have the idea of the tool, we don't know how to implement the strategy around it. A lot of coordination effort was needed. So how do we set up Flow? Where do we train? How do we train users to the Flow? Does engineering have access to the Flow to deploy software? Does operation needs to manage Flow? Who manages the infrastructure of the Flow? So there were a lot of questions that needed to be answered for its successful implementation. And we're still struggling to answer some of this question is because it's a mind shift change and it doesn't happen overnight. The two other big things that we talked about was we had a custom tool sets. We had PowerShells, Python, and the goal was how do we not change drastically overnight, but use some of those tools to make sure Flow is integrated into the system before we make any drastic changes around it. And then a value about pricing. So whenever you go to an enterprise software, it gives a lot of features, a lot of functionalities, but also comes with a cost around it. So how do we justify the cost to the price was also one thing that we had to figure it out. And it has to be an ongoing discussion around as you implement more enterprise-grade software, there's always something, the price is always going to be higher, but the value that it brings has to be measured accordingly. So one of the things that we had before we did we implement Flow or CI/CD processes or any of those things, we try to break down the teams into its own small composite group. What it meant was we used to have a business team that is separate with development team, and there was a testing and an operation. What we tried to figure it out as we implement Flow, it was not one of those things that will work in that manner. We had to break down those silos around it. We had to bring product management as a part of the team. We had to bring the Scrum Master as a part of the team. The testing they can report to different business leaders, which is okay from their processes, but as a team to deploy a software, they need to talk to each other every day. So we started first figuring it out, how do we define a small individual Scrum team that can actually deliver software and give them the CloudBees Flow to make sure they can all interact through the same common language. As we go through our processes, we also started integrating automated builds, automated test scripts, automated releases. We implemented infrastructure as a code, and all this was done either by a group of team, what we call as release engineer, or in collaboration with the development team. So collaboration started to getting more into our culture now. What we started seeing was the architects was taking a lot more responsibilities in building software, as well as building the infrastructure, as well as actually figuring it out, how do we deploy the code in the best efficient manner. So guess what, when a software actually doesn't work in production, the technical leads, they are the first one that gets called to figure out what's going wrong. So they have their vested interest in defining how do the software gets deployed. It was no longer I throw the code to some release team and they're going to deploy the code, and then I don't know why it's working versus not working. So as we integrated Flow, we saw a lot more technical engineers, technical architects being more interested and vested in the process of implementing the Flow in the way they wanted it and not somebody else wants it. And today, that's how our team looks like. We have small individual teams. We have CloudBees Flow as a center of excellence around it. We have a group of engineers that actually supports the infrastructure, as well as provides things like self-service catalogs, so that the engineering team can actually do their own deployment and builds and deployment of software. And to give an example of, we actually created a template of what we call as a microservice template. And what each individual team does is they define what their microservice name is, and it actually goes up and spins up the server at multiple levels. They spin up dev, one server, main, multiple, stage, multiple, production, and the code also gets automatically deployed through those automations. So we are really using the self-service catalog to the full benefit around it. So after going through this journey, one of the things that we realized is that do not change the culture drastically when you implement any new tools into your tool chain. And this morning, Sean talked about 40 tools in the tool belt. And every organization, I'm positive, looks like this. They have got multiple tools, and they want to unify, and every DevOps leader wants to unify to a certain standard. But in reality, that's not one of the possibilities around it. So if you look at this in Flow at AdvancedMD, we have got so many tools around it. We got Chef, we got Artifactory, we got Ansible, and we have not taken the time yet to unify everything, but what we took time is to unify Flow as the center of it. If you look at it, everything actually goes through the Flow. So whether you're in a development environment and you do CI processes, it uses Flow to trigger some of those packages. We use Artifactories, JFrog's Artifactory to deploy the packages. But again, Flow is the one that is actually deploying the package to Artifactory. So essentially what we did was we let each individual team choose what they want to do. They can spin up n number of servers, but they have to use Flow, but they can use Ansible, they can use Terraform, whatever, Chef, whatever they prefer to use around it. In that way, the skill sets remains with the people that we have. They don't have to learn new skills as we implemented Flow. Our next step of the journey would be to figure it out, is there a benefit in actually unifying all those things, or do we leave it as is? And it has its pros and cons both. So we are going through that journey at this point of the time. So if you look at it, we actually use Terraform and Chef and also Ansibles for deployment of infrastructure. Packaging is done through Artifactory. We use Flow's deployment mechanism to deploy some of our legacy app. Remember in 2014, we had the same server configurations that needed to get deployed. We use Flow's deployment tools to do that. And Flow also provides us some of the insights, the release insights, the metrics that we are trying to figure it out. How do we make use of those data element around it? And then once it is deployed, we use PowerShell scripting for some validations as well. And again, we use Flow as a center to make sure every script gets run through Flow. The scripts are actually checked in Git, so that it gets code reviewed by somebody else before Flow actually can trigger those processes. So essentially, the way we actually used our journey of CI/CD was making Flow as a center of excellence and then bolting tools on top of it. It made the adoption a little bit easier. I didn't have to go and send people to different conferences, different technology skill sets, but they have to learn how the orchestration application release works, and from there on, Flow was imbibed onto it. So that's our Flow at AdvancedMD as of today, and we'll keep on evolving as we go through these processes around it. And with this, I actually hand over to Gabe to do the next set.
Absolutely. Well, what a great story from AdvancedMD. I think one of the interesting things about it is one of the great things about just coming to these conferences in general is the ability to hear these real life stories as well. So I want to thank you for providing that. Show of hands, how helpful would it be if the world that we lived in looked like this, right? You have one team, one app, releasing into one environment. It'd be perfect, right? We'd all be able to enjoy our families. We'd be able to sit on the beach, relax, releases kind of handle themselves, right? So that's what a perfect world would look like, but we know in reality it looks a little bit more like this, right? You've got all kinds of different conflicts happening, schedules, tool chains, all these different overlaps that are taking place. So it makes life a little bit difficult. So one of the things that he brought up earlier, was talking about how we have all these tools that we're using, but we're not sure how to get them to all play nice together. We need them to be more continuous. We need them to be more collaborative with one another. And that's the difficult part, I think, of pulling this all together, is understanding what's the best way to do that. Is there a way to do that? And if so, how do we go about doing that? So with respect to what we've built around Flow, and there's 3 specific things. We wanted to help deliver value faster for organizations. And to do that, we wanted to make sure that you're able to connect everything from teams to your tools that you're using to all the processes that you already have in place. And I think it was a great example that he'd brought up earlier as well, is that you don't have to shake the earth and you don't have to uproot everything that is already going well. You need to find a way to just integrate that stuff and find a way to make everything sort of play nice together, I think. Predictability is another pillar as well to look at. You want to make sure that as you're approaching releases that the process that you have is repeatable, it's reliable, it's consistent. So that's something that Flow has sort of has at the foundation of it as well. And then the final piece is we work with a lot of organizations that find that compliance, governance, auditing, all of that's extremely important, right? Being able to make sure that you're able to see all that in a way that's transparent, that's reliable, and is consistent across the board. So with that, I wanted to introduce my colleague, Avan, who is in charge of product management for Flow, to give us a little bit more of a deep dive around the core competencies and also take a look under the hood, sort of an unboxing, if you will, of Flow here. Avan?
Thanks, Gabe. And thanks, Brad. It was great to hear about the story and how you've used Flow to really transform the way your organization delivers their software. And that's what I just wanted to share a little bit more detail about Flow, some of the differentiations we have in the product, starting with really what do we do. And we can kind of break it into 3 main areas in the product, where the first is deployment automation, where you have that model-based approach to predictably deploy your applications. And it doesn't matter what kind of application you have. It might be a traditional 3-tiered Java application. It might be that you have microservices that you're deploying to Kubernetes. Either way, we can model your application and then deploy it to any environment. So you might take that same application model and deploy it to your on-prem production environment, but you might have dynamic cloud-based dev environments that you spin up or test environments that you spin up. And all of that can be automated and orchestrated with Flow. And again, it's at any scale. It's a very robust, it's a highly scalable platform. We work with large enterprises who are doing this across hundreds, thousands of applications to all of the environments that they have. The other big part of the product, the application release orchestration of CloudBees Flow, is the release orchestration, where you can manage those release pipelines and release your software across your teams, integrating with your DevOps toolchain at every step of the way, and aggregating all of that data along the way for really a single view into all of the people, all of the processes, and environments that are part of your release. And then on top of that sits, the ability to manage and get visibility into what is happening in your DevOps process through DevOps Insight. This is where we have a number of out-of-the-box dashboards that pull in the data not only from the processes that you're running through CloudBees Flow, like your deployments, your releases, but also we pull ingest data from all of your DevOps toolchain along the way. So you can really get that visibility into your deployments, what's happening in your testing software, what are the features in Jira that are associated to your release. All of that is available in Flow, so you have that central point of view. Aside from those out-of-the-box dashboards, a big part is customizability. You can create your own dashboards. That's really what we hear a lot is, this is a great view, but can I add, one more angle, one more perspective on this dashboard? And yeah, you can. You can bring in your own data. You can create your own visuals on top of that with a very easy-to-use customization in DevOps Insight. So, Flow is a single unified platform that supports all of these different capabilities that I've been talking about: managing pipelines and environments, orchestrating releases, and automating deployments. It's Flow is differentiated in a number of ways, and one big one is the adaptability. It's the only solution that really lets you get started quickly with a lot of content and ease of use, but the big thing is you can also adapt it. There's the customization piece that you'll hear, I think, repeatedly is it's extensible. You can adapt it to your own processes as well. We have best practices to get you started, but we adapt easily. It also provides that unprecedented and actionable insight, and is highly scalable. It's a scalable and secure platform that's really ready for any sized enterprise. So let me go into some detail in each of these differentiating factors. Before I do that, I just wanted to also show you a screenshot here of one of our release pipelines where you can get that visibility in one view. This is a definition of a release pipeline, taking your application from, through the different environments, dev, QA, pre-prod, and prod, and you can see all of the steps, all of the tasks that need to be done along the way. There's a lot of flexibility and control that you have in how you can define and manage your release, and running this release really becomes that center point of view where you can aggregate all of the data, get visibility into exactly what has happened. Oops, I went the wrong way. All right, let me go a little bit more into that adaptability. We make it easy for users to get started with the product. It's that unified platform where rather than having different solutions for release and deploy and getting those dashboards, it's all in one platform with a shared object model, shared APIs across the functionality that makes it easy to understand, easy to set up, and use all of the capabilities together. The model greatly supports reusability. It's really central to how we approach the problems. And templatizing to make it easy to share those common functions and get users to onboard quickly. There is an easy-to-use GUI interface that makes it simple to start modeling, but also any object in Flow can also be represented in our DSL. So you can represent all of your automation as code. You kind of see a screenshot here where you have the pipeline, but also the DSL representation of that. So users can author, iterate on their automation in DSL, check it into their SCM, and promote it into Flow, and just work with it that way. We have a lot of our customers who are really using DSL as their entry point. The self-service catalog in Flow has numerous out-of-the-box best practices and templates to get started with your automation quickly. So it's really with a click of a button, you can create your application models based on best practices. You can create those pipelines and get started with the templates that we provide. Aside from that, Pra was talking about how they are using the self-service catalog where you can create your own catalog items once you've established what is the right pipeline that you want to use across your organization. You can standardize with that, create a self-service catalog item, and your users can just come in, again, click a button, and onboard their own pipelines and applications. So this makes it easy for new projects to onboard and also promotes that standardization across your organization as much as possible, where it can be parameterized to work with people's processes individually. And then the big part about the extensibility is, or adaptability, is the fact that everything is extensible. It's not really a prescriptive approach. You can take these templates, you can get started, but then you can adapt. Everything can be changed and adapted to the unique processes. We work with customers who have very complex deployment processes that they can't change and streamline overnight. It's going to take time, and so we can take what they're currently doing, model the process, and make it very custom to what they need. So there's the simple approach with the templates, but also the ability to adapt and work with your process. So next is the insight. So we have that unprecedented and actionable insight. What you see here is one of the dashboards from DevOps Insight, which is the release command center, which gives a high-level view of your release, starting on the left column with with planning, going to dev, build, test, deployment into operations, and pulling data not only from Flow with the deployments and the release, but also looking at the tools that you're using. We might be pulling information from Jira, from Jenkins, from your testing tools, from ServiceNow once you're done, to see what is happening. Once post deployment, what are the issues that are being raised. So all of that information is aggregated in one place. This is just one of the dashboards in DevOps Insight that gives that, visibility at a high level that can be, something that a release manager looks like. It can be something that your management team is looking at. But this is just one view. You can also dig into the details. So for someone who wants to see why is this happening, what is the problem, there's that ability to drill down where you can click and see, okay, what is the actual deployment? What is the failure? You can click further to see the log files. Why did this fail? And it's actionable at that point where you can go back and remediate, make changes, and improve your process. Our pipelines provide, just the pipelines themselves, the running of the pipeline provides an audit trail in itself with automatic tracking of compliance, promotions, people, tools that are involved all along the way. And from this high-level view, again, you can drill down into the details and see what happened. We also have a machine learning component in Flow that can be added on to look at your build processes and get predictive analytics to see, based on based on our machine learning, see what might be happening in the future with your builds. This is just another view within the pipelines, within releases, to look at planned versus actual, where you might, if you have a planned out release, to see how you're doing in comparison with your plan. How are you actually tracking? And focus in on areas and bottlenecks, looking at what is automated, where am I taking the most time? And then finally, we're scalable. We're really the most reliable at any speed and scale. We have a clustered architecture, agent-based architecture that is, provides high availability and also the ability to scale to any level of workload, really. The agent-based solution gives you the fault tolerance and reliability in the architecture as well, where you don't have to worry about losing a connection and losing your deployment. The agent-based architecture also provides security and the ability to really deploy anywhere very securely. From a security perspective, we have very fine-grained access controls, the ability to tie down your processes. You can have the entire enterprise on one server, but someone who logs in only sees the things that are pertinent to them. You have the ability to lock things down very tightly. And, in general, it's a very human-friendly UI. You have the ability for your teams to come together and get to see everything that's happening across their organization. So that's all I had. I would have loved to show you a demo as well, but what I would encourage anyone who has any interest or wants to learn more, please, come up to me after the session, ask questions. But we also have, at the CloudBees booth, we have folks there giving demos. I'll be there as well, where you can actually see all of this in action. It's great to talk about it, but I think the real impact is when you can actually see it. I wish I was, if I had more time, I would have just clicked into the product here itself, but we have those demo pods available, so please, you can see CloudBees Flow itself. You can see how Flow works with CloudBees Core as well. And I'll hand it back to Gabe.
Excellent, thanks so much. So I think one of the things that I wanted to tie off at the end here as well as we head into the Q&A is just looking overall at what CloudBees provides. So traditionally, CloudBees is based on Jenkins, right? But today, it's a much more broad and much more holistic platform when you think about CI. When you think about CD, it includes everything from what we talked about today, Flow. Of course, we've got elements of CI as well within Core, CodeShip, DevOptics. So there's just a broad range of different products that we have inside the portfolio, and it's all leading to What Sean kind of talked about earlier in the keynote is this concept of software delivery management, right? Being able to pull all of these different things together to collectively help manage an entire software release process. So I know there's probably a lot of questions. I wanted to give Pra a chance to come back up on stage and allow you to ask questions about maybe his journey, how that might apply specifically to yours, how it might differ, and anything in between. So.
You have only 10 minutes before the lunch.
We're all keeping you from lunch, so definitely. Any questions specifically, or everyone feel really good about their releases? Got one.
My question was how long or what was it? Was there an incentive to kind of bring all the different teams together to kind of get agile cycle time with a new workflow that would make transition?
So I mean, incentive is a very key word, right? So incentive was one of the things that we had the technical leads bringing to the flow was, say, they don't get calls, they cannot be blamed, right? So there are different ways of incentives around why we implemented flow around it. So the biggest one was to give the technical leader the more broader view of his feature or his product from end-to-end perspective. And engineers take pride on when they can deliver a quality software which can be deployed and the customers are using it. So in a bigger sense, the incentive was more of the team to get involved in the whole software delivery mechanism and not just creating the software. That makes sense.
Any other questions? You guys hungry? We have one right here.
So the reality was by force. So that was the hard reality of it. I mean, whenever we have a new tool, and I think in this morning they talked about having a separate team that go and give them a sweet taste of what they would look like. So the first reality was flow was into the system. So there was no going back around it. So now we had to we actually brought in one of the team that was more into agile development, more into microservices, and we gave them the first test of flow. Once you get the first customer, it's a word of mouth that flows through it. It's the same thing like how we sell our software to the customer. The first customer is always a difficult one. Once they see the value and the benefit of it, they're the one that becomes a more prominent across the organization. So step one was by force. Step two was identifying the team that can actually see it. And step three was having the team do something successful so that it can propagate it across the organization.
I can just add to that. I think we've seen customers, I mean, this is like the approach that we've seen work well, where, we've seen customers who've tried to just do broad sweep across an entire organization. This is what you're using, push it down your throat kind of thing, and that it doesn't work, right? It works to identify the right application, the right team to adopt and start out small, thinking about the big picture, thinking about how this is going to scale, how this is going to be templatized across, but starting small, starting with a focused team, and then growing from there. Because I think we've seen it with both ways, and I've seen it fail when you try to go big too quickly.
For the So your question was how is databases getting deployed to the CI/CD? So it's a very interesting question. It has been my passion to figure that one out. I was actually in a different session with Datical and talking about CI/CD. Honestly, we have not solved it. So I mean, that's the honest reality of it is. I mean, there are open source tools like Liquibase from the Postgres side of it, DAGPAck from the SQL side of it that can integrate with Flow, and we can do it. But the scale, right? The CI/CD talks about testing it in a lower environment. We don't have a lower environment. We have like 5 petabytes of data. So we have not successfully done it yet with Flow. What we have approached a strategy of what we call as a diff-based strategy. But still, So let me rephrase. We have a huge customer database and we have ancillary databases. The ancillary databases are getting deployed through Flow because it's small, the scripts are less, the data conversions, if something happens, is less. Now, the bigger databases that we have, we actually used a migration strategy and we are using a homegrown tool to solve that problem. And honestly, I have not found any one tool that solves everything from the SQL side of it, to be honest. Great question. I still have to solve that one. So if you remember my slide, the implementation timeline depends on less on the tool, more about standardizing processes and culture. So the value of the tool, the moment we did the self-service catalog, the value of the tool was right the next week. To implement the first step of deploying the tool, making sure it works in a scalable infrastructure, we have deployed actually Flow in AWS infrastructure. It took us a while to set it up, but once the mechanism was done, I mean, you will see within weeks the value proposition out of it. It still took a little bit of long term to have the technical engineers bring into the system to understand those aspects around it. I would give it a rough or 4 to 6 weeks before you start seeing the values around it, assuming you have done a lot of preparatory courses on Flow. We actually went through some of the professional courses to make sure we can set up Flow in the right way rather than implementing our own. And lunchtime. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.